With the initial startup, we usually have an initial meeting with the client where we're really scoping out the deadline, the goals, and the costs. With this information, we are putting together our technical specifications, our deadlines, our statement of work, and also really outlining our possible, what the benefits are of what we're doing and what the potential concerns or issues that could happen as we go through the project. Also, cost. I mean, that's an incredibly important thing that we're doing. So it is really important that for what we find with our clients is that not only are we outlining what the solution is going to be, but also giving them a high and a low of how much something's going to cost. And we are also at this time really starting to talk about the idea of a communication guideline. How often people want to be communicated with, what's the next steps, and making sure that we are putting together that plan. Once we have a project and it's actually actively going, we now get into the project scheduling, or what we call the roadmap. We develop a project workflow. This project workflow will have all the different phases, the resources for each phase, and who's responsible for each one of these stages. We develop quality control for each of the stages to make sure that we're addressing step by step different issues that potentially could happen, and making sure that we are really catching things early. You don't want to go into an entire end of a project and still have those problems. We identify stakeholders, and with these stakeholders, we discussed that a little bit. When you are getting to the case management side, there are different stakeholders. You have internal stakeholders and you have external. It's important when you look at internal and external, though, also look at how often they want to be communicated with. This gets into the idea of a communication guideline. And you don't want to be going back to a partner and constantly feeding them information unless they want that. So it's important to make sure you have that. In addition to that, we use a project update form. This is a document that we put together where you have the stakeholders, the issues, change orders, all the different where you are in the phases, and we constantly send those out based upon that guideline that's requested by the client. And it's important on that too, that what we've found, just a little bit tidbit, that you should send them the same time every day. If you send it at 10 o'clock and the client wants it on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday an update, send it at 10 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. It really helps them to be able to really feel more comfortable with the project. We then get into with the idea of review, and the kind of work begins. Make sure that you are gathering your samples. Make sure that there's a connection between the beginning and the end. The idea of being able to follow the documents and follow what you're doing with MD5 hash values from the beginning when the project begins all the way through to the end, and looking at those connections between those phases. You should be able to have buckets for each one of the phases, and be able to, if you are culling, removing, reviewing, you should be able to really find, you should be able to point out where everything is in a project as you go through. Ask questions. Whoever you're working with, a vendor or internal, constantly ask questions to get that information that you need, and keep on questioning why, what reports mean, and where are we. You should make sure that we have that information as well. Delivery of the project, make sure there's final QC and QA, review the samples, and create final reports. You need to make sure that you have those final reports and sum everything up. And then our last part is our post-project requirements, which is archiving all those documents that we put together, all the communication that we've had throughout the project, and really archiving that to a nice little package to be able to put away. So for some reason, if anybody needs anything, we can go back and now pick that up, and it's already organized. That's the big part for me, is that I find that looking at the entire life cycle, and then if you have that methodology up front, you are able to very quickly organize things and then be able to find things at the back end.
Wow. My system isn't that elaborate, but at the same time, I'm sure I don't process near what you guys process in a year. what I would say to law firms is take baby steps. I mean, I don't think any of us have the resources to sit down and implement and plan an entire project management system, but you can start off. How many of you have a list of the services your department provides? How many know? Okay, start there. If you don't have one, sit down, look at the EDRM model and say, what do we do with respect to identification? Do we do consulting? Do we interview witnesses? What do we do with collection? Maybe we don't collect at all, we outsource that. Who's responsible for doing all these different services for each case? Once you identify those, you can then say, okay, of the services we provide, what do we need to standardize? What things are repeatable that we need to develop standards around? So processing specifications. How many of you have standard processing specs? So every time you process, you know if you're processing to native or if you're processing to TIFF, what that's going to look like. Something as simple as even creating a workflow and going through the stages of actually how you manage a case. Again, we don't have a full-blown system like John has, although it looks really cool. If you haven't seen iFramework, it's something I'm definitely going to look at. Anyway, but budget, once the budget allows for that. But right now, what we have is, we have a mishmash, but we do have a case intake database that I can go back to and see how much we processed and how much we outsourced. We actually use a ticket system, so all requests for the department come through a ticket system. And then it's assigned to our department, so we manage when a request is made and when it's closed. We have processing specs. We have a communication plan. When a ticket comes in, within an hour, you've got to respond via email and say, I've got the ticket, I'm looking at it, and give them a status. So either it's done, hopefully, most of the time not, or this is how long I think it's going to take. And make sure that we're communicating with the attorneys and paralegals, because as long as you keep them updated, they're usually pretty happy. But boy, if you get a project or a request in, and it sits there for a day or two, even if you're working on it, if they don't know that can create problems. So just creating those, and we also have a list of documentation that's required for each case. And we work very closely with the paralegals, because the paralegals really they're the ones that actually manage the case. We manage the electronic litigation support piece, and I think it varies by firm how you do that. But for example, we don't really have standards on review because we don't do reviews. The paralegals do the protocols for reviews. They do the training for e-discovery reviews. Now, we will sit down and help them. We'll work with them. We'll create fields. We'll do whatever they need in the database. But that's an area that my department doesn't get involved in, while others of you may manage the actual document review. So depending on what services you provide, I think that's where you can start out to begin building some standards and systems around to help manage the case.
Whether your group is large like ICON, Seth, I would imagine you guys have, 40 project managers probably, or so, give or take, or if you're just a one-person department, which some of the law firms we talk to are. I think it's important to have the methodologies that Seth went through, so you have that action plan, you have that workflow, you have an understanding of what you need to do next, because if you don't have time to do it right the first time, you sure as hell, not going to find the time, sorry about that, to find what's going on. Hey, it's early, I slept there, sorry about that. Oh, that's nice. So get those methodologies in place is the message that I always say to people. And like Julie said, start slow, start simple, and then build upon that plan moving forward. So sorry about that slip.